And so it says graph y equals 4. And so we've never really seen anything like that before. And so I'm going to actually use the hint they give us, and let's make a table. X's and Y's. Like usual, we choose any points for X. So I'm going to choose my -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, my standby points. And then we're going to plug these into our equation. If we plug in -2 into that equation for X, it technically doesn't go anywhere. So our equation didn't change at all. It still says y equals 4. The same is going to happen no matter what value you plug in. Every time, notice, y is 4. Y equals 4 the whole way down my table. And so if I graph this, I have -2, 1, 2, -2, 4, -1, 4, 0, 4, 1, 4, and 2, 4. Look at what kind of line I ended up with. And remember, when we graph, extend your line and put on arrows. You must do that. But notice what we have. We get a horizontal line. Whenever you see a y equals, we'll get a horizontal line. So we graphed one of our horizontal lines. We're going to still get to vertical, but we also want to talk about slope today. And so think about what slope is to you, and go ahead and fill it out. We know it's rate of change. Rate of change. We also know it's change in y over the change in x. We also know it as rise over 1. There's a lot of different ways to think about slope. However, there is also a specific equation to calculate slope. And that's how we find it. And this is going to be essential to know. You're probably going to have to memorize it, to be honest. But what it is slope. So m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now you might be asking, what's y2 and y1 mean? And we're going to get to that. But for right now, what we need to know is that it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So our first instance of using this slope equation, so remember it's on top for if we forgot it, is we're going to actually deal with the horizontal line. And this is the one we actually graphed earlier. So what we need in order to get our y2s and y1s, x2s and x1, we need to pick off 2 points from our line. So I'm going to choose this one right here, the point 0, 4. And I'm going to choose the point over here at 3, 4. You pick any 2 points on your line, and then you're going to label them. We know they go x, y, so we're going to say this is our x1 and our y1. And this point over here is our x2 and our y2. And then, when we find our slope, it's simply plugging things in. y2 is 4 minus y1, which is 4, over x2, which is 3, minus x1, which was 0. 4 minus 4 is 0. 3 minus 3, 0 is 3. And so 0 divided by 3, when 0 is on top, you get 0. And this is actually going to be true for every horizontal line. So if the line is horizontal, your slope will always be 0. Okay? Now, if your line is not horizontal, slope is going to change. So if we look at our second example, we have to find 2 points on our line. And we can pick any 2 we want. And I actually see one right here, the point 2, 0. And then I'm going to use the point they gave us here, the point 5, -2. Remember to label x1, y1, x2, and y2. And then go ahead and let's do the math. y2 is -2 minus 0 over 5 minus 2. -2 minus 0 is -2. 5 minus 2 is 3. This is already simplified, and there's our slope. So finally, if we look at things in generic, when y equals any number, like we've done on the last 2 slides, what kind of line will we always graph? And in both instances, y equaled 4, we had horizontal. So the line will always be horizontal. And it will always hit the axis. So it will always hit the y-axis in this case. So if we intersect the y-axis, x is always going to be 0. And then that y value is going to be whatever the y is. It's going to be this number up here. It will always go through that point on an axis. And we also discovered that with horizontal lines, slope is always 0. It's always going to be 0 no matter what points you plug in. Now, if we've done y equals a number, we know we got a horizontal line. So, using your guess, in your best judgment, what do you think is going to happen when we have x equals a number? I hope you said we're going to get a vertical line, because that's exactly what will happen. We have our x's and our y. So if you want to see it in a table form, notice it says x equals -6. That's the only value x can be. X has to be -6, no matter what we put in for y. So I can say 5, 2, 0, -1, -3. It doesn't even matter. I could have chosen 100 for y. But x has to be -6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's -6. 0, -6, 2, -6, 5, -6, -1, and -6, -3. When I connect my dots, when I put my arrow on the end of my line, right there, I intersected at the point -6, 0. And x equals my -6. And I got a vertical line. Now, let's go to the next side and see what our slope's going to be. So, if we forgot, slope equation is up here for you to reference and look at. We'll have to memorize it soon enough, though, just so you know. And now we're going to find the slope. We're going to start with just the line for practice. And I'm going to pick those 2 points. I have the point 0, 2 and the point 1, 5. Label them x1, y1, x2, y2, and know that whichever one you choose for points 1 and 2 really does not matter. Then my slope, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. 2 minus 5 is -3 over -1, which is really just 3. And now we got to this vertical line. I'm going to choose my intersect point, so I'm going to choose the point 4, 0. I like a point that has 0 in it for sure. Then I'm going to choose this point right here, 4, 4. I'm going to label them x1, y1, x2, y2. And let's see what happens when we do the math. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You get -4 over 0. Now, what does it mean, and what happens when something is divided by 0? You put it in the calculator, you're going to get an error message because it can't happen. You can never divide by 0. And so our slope, when we have vertical lines, is undefined. And it's always going to be undefined for a vertical line. No matter what that vertical line is, your slope will be undefined. So looking at generic cases, when x equals any number, like we have had in the last 2 slides, we have a vertical line, it's still going to hit that axis point. So we're going to hit the x value, and 0 will be our y. And slope, like I said, will always be undefined. And that will never change for vertical lines. And finally, we have just a few more problems dealing with finding the slope for more practice. So find the slope. Here's our equation. I hope we have it close to memorized. And whenever I start, I love to label my points. I always go x1, y1, x2, y2. If I don't, you might make a small mistake that could get you the problem wrong. So I'm going to do 4 minus 0 over 4 minus 1. 4 minus 0 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. 4/3 is simplified. Improper fractions are okay. And there's my answer. Send an example. x1, y1, x2, y2. If I find my slope, I take -1 minus -3 over 0 minus a -2. Now here's where you really want to watch your math. Remember, subtracting a negative is just adding. So -1 plus 3 is 2, and 0 over 2 is 2. However, this is not our answer because 2 over 2 can be simplified to just 1. So our answer would be 1. And last but not least, story problems. So without graphing, and so even though it says without graphing, I like at least doing a small visual. We need to tell whether the slope of the line is positive, negative, 0, or undefined. Remember, positive slopes go up, negative go down. 0, what did we learn? Are horizontal, and undefined are vertical. And then it says to find the slope. So, Tony Hawk's building a new skateboard ramp. Beginning at the origin, I'm going to graph a little bit. It's going to be rough, that's okay. The base of my ramp is 10 feet long, and it's 15 feet high. What would be my slope? What would be my slope? So, I can see my slope is positive, and I know mathematically it's the rise, so 15 over the run. However, I'm going to simplify and say my slope is 3 over 2. Next, we're going to the carnival. We have to pay $5 to get in, and tickets are 50 cents each. So if I would label this, I'm going to say this is my tickets, and this is the money I'm spending. Okay, so right away, without buying any tickets, I spend $5. And then if I buy one ticket, I spend another 50 cents, 2, another 50, and so on. And it's going to look like that. So I can see my slope is positive. But now the question is, can I find what my slope is? Well, I can do this by finding 2 points. I know that without buying any tickets, I pay $5. However, if I buy one ticket, I spent $5.50. Right here, we have my x1 and my y1, my x2 and my y2. We can do the math to find our slope. We're going to take $5.50 minus 5 over 1 minus 0, and we get 50 over 1. So my slope is 50 cents. And so what I did is I read my story problem and I found 2 ordered pairs in order to come up with my slope.